When people donate clothing in the global north,
Mm-hmm.
most of it won't stay there. So most of it will be sorted and
Mm-hmm.
exported to the global south, to countries like Ghana, where people purchase the clothing in the form of bales. And when they purchase these bales, they don't really have any idea what the quality of the clothing is inside of the bale. They just know that they're purchasing maybe like men's white shirts from London, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So when they open the bale, they become responsible for recommodifying all of the items inside of that bale through resale, repair, and upcycling. And all of this exists in this market ecosystem. The market we work with is called Kantamanto. It's the largest secondhand clothing market in the world and sees around 15 million garments on a weekly basis, which is quite a lot. It's quite significant. And essentially in this market, again, you don't just have people reselling clothes, but you have people refitting clothes, repairing clothes, over-dyeing clothes, screen printing. You have individual upcyclers, as well as remanufacturers that are maybe making 100 to 150 items per day using a waste stream that they have no control over, right?
On average, the U.S. sends around 1.5 million tons of secondhand clothes abroad each year, a little over 3 billion items. These items follow the same global supply chain, manufacturing different parts and dyes from all over the world to only get shipped back to the global south countries once they've disposed of it in this end of life. So once a garment is made, sold, used, and disposed of, where does it go? Right? We think sometimes it goes we talk about going to a landfill. Maybe it's the landfill, in the different county in your state, but for a lot of our textile waste actually doesn't end up there. Well, for many clothes, they actually just don't end up in a landfill in the country of consumption. It gets shipped off and end up in a landfill somewhere else in the world, primarily in the global south. Secondhand shops, for the clothes that they can't resell domestically, they actually export secondhand clothes to developing economies all over the world. They send them in big bales, segmented into different categories, whether it be winter jackets, whether it be jeans, whether it be women's dresses, whatever it may be, to different markets around the world. Through a web of clothing exporters, what doesn't get sold in our thrift stores domestically gets shipped by the ton to overseas markets. With the rise of fast fashion and the overall reduction of quality of garments, the sheer increase in volume produced, and the speed at which clothes are disposed of by their first user, these all contribute to an oversupply of secondhand clothes that are received in these secondhand markets in the global south. These markets and local communities, albeit used to have a domestic clothing industry, have lost them because of the cheap prices of foreign imported clothes, secondhand clothes. In these local markets, the supply exceeds the demand for these types of clothes being brought in, and there is no proper waste management system in these regions to handle the remnants of these imports. These clothes end up in unofficial landfills, beaches, rivers, polluting the local environment, releasing greenhouse gases, and clogging up waterways, let alone the horrible social and financial implications that this whole process has on the local communities. Many times, this is the real end of life of a garment. This component of the value chain is often forgotten and less talked about by Western organizations and companies, as our current make, waste, dispose model forgets about the final component. Once it's in the bin, it seems to be forgotten about, but in reality, it's not. It's there in someone's backyard, causing irreversible damage. Now, the secondhand market isn't all bad. It does provide some quality clothes to the locals at a fair price, as well as providing jobs for people in the community. But when the input quality dwindles and the financials don't make sense, it becomes a real problem. And that's where we are for a lot of these markets around the world. In our final episode, we talked to Liz Ricketts, the founder of the OR Foundation. It's a nonprofit operating out of the US and Ghana, focused on the intersection of environmental justice, education, and fashion development, challenging the traditional model of waste colonialization, most evident in the Kantamanto market in Accra, Ghana, one of the world's largest used clothing markets, and home to where hundreds of thousands of garments get shipped to from all over the world. With the decline in quality and increase in overproduction, the amount of garments unable to be sold has ballooned and put the onus to dispose of the remaining textile waste on this local community where proper waste management doesn't really exist. This has created tremendous environmental and social problems for many communities in the global south, not just in Ghana. The OR Foundation has multiple layers to their work, including immediate relief through direct action on human rights and environmental abuses, educational programming and awareness, and research and institutional advocacy to steer system-level policies and investment to address this problem of waste colonialization. In this conversation, we get to speak to someone who's on the front lines of a real problem that often gets overlooked in conversations here in the West when it comes to our larger industry and value chain. There's no place better to see the actual impacts of our overproduction and reduction of quality and lack of care for our products than in markets like Kantamanto, where you see bales and bales and bales of unusable clothes that nobody really wants and shouldn't have been produced in the first place. When we think about reformulating this industry and reformulating this value chain, we need to think about the end of life from the get-go, and having conversations with the OR Foundation and we're understanding the real global end of life of our garments is critical to redesigning a brighter future. Liz, thank you so much for your time and joining us on the Growing Green Ventures podcast. I'm really excited to dive into your story and dive into the workings of the OR Foundation, because it really touches on a piece of the value chain that is the culmination of almost a lot of different things put together and doesn't get enough airtime, let's just say. And I'd love for you to start by just giving an introduction to yourself and the organization.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. So my name is Liz. I'm the co-founder and director of the OR Foundation, and usually based in Accra, but calling today from New York State. And essentially, we're a nonprofit that's been around since 2011. My background is in the fashion industry, so I studied design and I worked in the industry as a designer and a stylist for a little while, and kind of saw the shift of the industry towards a fast fashion business model. And for me, the impact of that was very clear in terms of the increase in waste on the production side, but also the impact that it was having on people. And that's what eventually led me to Accra, where we established the OR Foundation to support. Now our mission is to catalyze a justice-led circular textiles economy, working in partnership with Kantamanto market ecosystem, which is the largest secondhand clothing market in the world.
Amazing. I mean, we're going to get into this, but high level, how would you say, what are the main points that your organization takes to transition towards a more responsible and circular fashion ecosystem in general?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're really lucky in the sense that we essentially operate within a 2-mile radius, which means that we're able to apply a pretty holistic approach to the concerns around fashion waste and trying to support this community, because there's an automatic feedback loop. Our office is a 10-minute walk from Kantamanto. Our recycling center is on the other side of Kantamanto, so we're there every single day. And have a very open door and sort of how we engage with our work. So we're able to, again, sort of tackle both the material aspects, working on trying to improve waste management, creating new materials and products out of the clothing that cannot be sold, while also trying to respond to the immediate needs of community members who might be experiencing debt because of purchasing a bad bale, or community members who maybe want training to improve their business and to seek out new markets. And then we also do environmental research on top of that. So we try to tackle it from all lenses. I don't know if your audience will be too familiar with the secondhand clothing trade, though, so maybe I should explain that a little bit.
About that. Sure.
Okay. So, I mean, when people donate clothing in the global north, most of it won't stay there. So most of it will be sorted and exported to the global south, to countries like Ghana, where people purchase the clothing in the form of bales. And when they purchase these bales, they don't really have any idea what the quality of the clothing is inside of the bale. They just know that they're purchasing maybe like men's white shirts from London, for instance. So when they open the bale, they become responsible for recommodifying all of the items inside of that bale through resale, repair, and upcycling. And all of this exists in this market ecosystem. The market we work with is called Kantamanto. It's the largest secondhand clothing market in the world and sees around 15 million garments on a weekly basis, which is quite a lot. It's quite significant. And essentially in this market, again, you don't just have people reselling clothes, but you have people refitting clothes, repairing clothes, over dyeing clothes, screen printing. You have individual upcyclers, as well as remanufacturers that are maybe making 100 to 150 items per day using a waste stream that they have no control over, right? So it's an incredibly creative and vibrant sort of ecosystem of people working on solutions to try to keep clothing in circulation. It's very much a model of circularity, but also Kantamanto is being deeply impacted by a legacy of unregulated fast fashion. So essentially, we have a 20-year legacy of unregulated overproduction. We define fast fashion just as a business model of volumes over value, which means that there's no longer enough embedded value in the clothing that is ending up in Kantamanto for it to be worth it for the retailers to resell it, repair it, and remanufacture it. So people are struggling, the business is struggling, and people are no longer really able to make a profit off of this business anymore, which then leads to waste. It leads to unsold clothing and unsold product. And in Accra, we don't have a waste management system that is able to absorb that. There's no sanitary landfill or incinerator to kind of hide it, unlike what we might have in the global north. And so that waste becomes visible, and unfortunately a lot of the waste ends up being burnt out in the open or washing out to sea. And so it's impacting people's health as well as the ecosystem around Accra fairly significantly. And so our work is really looking at how do we balance support for what is working within this ecosystem, for the creativity and the ingenuity around the resale and the repair and the upcycling and this model of circularity, while at the same time acknowledging that this community is being deeply impacted by fast fashion and there is waste, and we need to come up with solutions for the inevitable fact that not everything will be resold or repaired or upcycled. So coming up with solutions to collect this waste and develop new materials and products out of it, while also making sure that, again, we're there first and foremost to support people in this community to make sure that they can thrive and prosper on their skill set.
When did this larger, because obviously for the record, it's not obviously just Ghana, it's the global south in general. You'll find it in South America, Africa, Asia, and the like. I'm actually wearing this shirt right here that I picked up at a secondhand market in Thailand for 20 USD cents or something like that. And when did that global trade start happening? When did it start picking up? And I guess, and in the onset, was it profitable for those importers and those retailers on the ground in Ghana?
Yes. So the first parts of your question. So, I mean, the secondhand clothing trades. So, I mean, throughout history, we've primarily clothed ourselves with secondhand clothing, aside from very wealthy people that were able to access, kind of new bespoke product. So the reality is, I think it's important if we zoom out and take a long view at history, like new clothing or our expectation that we should be able to buy new clothing is quite new, really not until like the 1950s. So it hasn't even really been 100 years of, sort of this type of consumption being common. So I think it's important to understand that, because the secondhand clothing trade became an outlet for this burgeoning sort of like new manufacturing to exist. So the secondhand clothing trade in Ghana specifically started under colonialism, because people in Ghana were required to forego kind of indigenous dress for Western style clothing to enter certain buildings or to get certain jobs or to go to church or to go to school. And so suits and, kind of Western style apparel started being shipped and sold as kind of like hand-me-downs to people to be able to access those spaces. And then from there, the trade relationships were formed. And then in the 1950s and 60s, again, you start to see the rise of industrialization in fashion. You start to see the introduction of credit cards. You start to see the growth of malls across America.
Yeah.
And how do you start to convince people that they should buy new stuff when for so long they've handed things down and repaired things and upcycled things? You have to give people kind of this guilt-free outlet for their excess to convince them to go out and buy new stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the secondhand clothing trade became an avenue for getting rid of the things that were currently in our closet, so to make way for buying new things. And so it really coincides with the independence movement in Ghana. Ghana got its independence in 1957, which is, again, around the same time that you see the introduction of the credit card and the growth of malls in America.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, it's only grown. And I think it's useful for people to know. So the term for secondhand clothing in Ghana is obruni wawu, which means dead white man's clothes. And that term comes specifically from the fact that people assumed that the excess must be coming from dead people, because why else would living people get rid of so much clothing, right? So
Yeah.
I think that speaks to the fact that like excess, or this type of consumption that we now feel is so commonplace, or that we feel is even a right, maybe, was a foreign concept. Yeah. Was a foreign concept and not immediately understood. Today, of course, people know that it's not coming from dead people, and that it's coming from people donating things, or store rejects and things like that. And then to the second part of your question, yes, the secondhand clothing trade used to be better business, and there also used to be, for instance, within Kantamanto market, there used to be a better balance between the markets sort of selling foreign secondhand clothing and also locally made product. So some of the work that our team has done is gone into the archives in Ghana and pulled images and reference material on the history of Kantamanto. And you can see that in the 50s and 60s, 70s, there were handbags and shoes and different accessories, as well as clothing that was manufactured in Ghana that was also being sold in Kantamanto next to the foreign secondhand clothes. So they kind of balanced each other out and complemented one another, and the quality of the secondhand clothing was much higher. So it was a good business for people. But today, no longer. And that's, kind of why we started the work that we do now, is because we saw this shift where it used to be a business that people would want to hand down to their kids. We were going to the market and talking to retailers and started asking them, is this still a business you would want your kids to take over? And they started saying no. And that's when we knew that, it was a real problem, that something was collapsing, because people just no longer felt that it was a dignified or a profitable business.
I'd love to, before jumping into the environmental components of this trade and your organization, I'd love to get a little overview of Liz herself and how she got into this work, and your journey from youth to wanting to go into fashion to now working on creating this nonprofit. What always drew you to fashion, and what was that inspiration to getting into the industry?
Yeah. So let's see where to start. I mean, I decided to study fashion quite late. I was very much a kind of nerdy kid and an overachiever, and was going to go to school for marine biology.
Oh, cool.
But then had some experiences in high school that just made me want to pursue what I then considered more of a hobby, which was my sort of creative and artistic side. And I think choosing design and choosing fashion was very much a balance between my desire to pursue the arts with my parents' concern that maybe that's not a very sustainable pathway. And design is a little bit, more capitalistic maybe than the arts.
Employable.
Yes, business centered. So I studied design, and really initially had an interest kind of in costume design and again, the sort of more expressive aspects and character development around that. But ended up working in the industry as a designer and also as a stylist. I wasn't in the industry for very long because of what I witnessed. So I was working in New York City and also in London, and I was privileged to kind of work um, within the luxury side of the industry, but I was doing that at a time when everything started shifting to fast fashion. So going from two
Mhm.
seasons a year to 5 seasons a year, and then to monthly drops or weekly drops. And I saw two things. So one was um, the immediate increase in waste on the production side, because it's impossible to sort of predict demand when you're moving that fast.
Mhm.
And also, to that end, you start seeing the brands essentially become marketing machines, and like the real creativity and the real design work being diminished. Because when you're producing so much product and you're churning things out so quickly and it's so trend focused, like marketing becomes more important, right? Because you're essentially manufacturing demand using well funded marketing campaigns. Um, so yeah, the livelihoods. The second thing that I noticed was just the mental health of people who were working on the creative side or who were working in
Mm.
design
Yeah.
were also being deeply impacted by this, because they were being asked to operate at a very inhumane pace and also losing touch with their consumer. Because when you're making, when you have 2 seasons a year, that gives you time to not only develop your ideas, make sure that the fit is right, do proper design work, but it also means that you have the time to go to the store where your clothing is being sold and to see how people interact with it and to talk to consumers, and you have that tangible relationship. And so people lost that. And yeah, there very much was like a mental health crisis within the industry that I witnessed.
Mhm.
So a lot of people turning to substance abuse or attempting suicide. And so that was the big wake up call for me,
Mhm.
because from the material side, I had the skills to upcycle. So that one didn't really alarm me, actually, because I felt like, okay, there's material waste. I can design something, I can design a solution for this. So I started upcycling and just sort of transitioned to having my practice using materials that already existed.
Mhm.
But then when it came to the mental health, that was what really alarmed me, because I realized that, if this was the impact that it was having on people in this very privileged position within the industry, then imagine what is happening to people along the rest of the value chain.
Mhm.
And that's when I decided that, I didn't want to be complicit um, in the direction that the industry was headed, but I also felt that it wasn't responsible to just kind of like throw my hands up and leave.
Mhm.
I had developed the skill, um, and my parents had helped put me through design school. So I wanted to commit to trying to improve the industry and be part of a solution. And so I started offering my services to anyone who would have me, kind of in the industry, who was trying to improve things. And one of the organizations I started working for was a fair trade fashion company that was based in Ghana, which was co-founded by my now partner Branson. So I went to Ghana to upcycle clothes with this company in 2011, and so went to Kantamanto within like the first week of arriving in Accra, and that changed everything for me again,
Mhm.
because I think Kantamanto to me, like I owe a lot of my peace of mind to Kantamanto. I think that Kantamanto is a very honest place. In the global north, like we're surrounded by excess all the time, but we
Mhm.
don't see it because it's all hidden in these kind of like tidy little logistical units that make waste feel smart or
Mhm.
clean and modern, when
Yeah.
really it's just waste.
Yeah.
And then you go to Kantamanto and you see the reality. Kantamanto is not tidy. It's crude and it's real.
Yeah.
There's just piles and piles of stuff everywhere. um and also there's all of this creativity. So I saw two things. I saw that uh, I knew that the clothing was exported, but again, confronting the reality of it is different. And I felt like people where I come from are not very aware of this reality. And two, I saw that there's already a lot of solutions being developed within this marketplace. There's so much creativity. There's so many upcyclers here. So I'm not needed as a designer. That's not the role that I should play, right? Because I don't want to take the place of someone who is Ghanaian who's already doing this work. But maybe there's a role for raising awareness and for supporting this market ecosystem and the community that is here. And so then that was the origin of the OR Foundation.
Amazing. How was it growing your team for a mission-driven organization? You met your partner through this initiation that you found and you went to. How did it happen, wanting to turn this idea of helping into a reality, and then taking and gathering the resources required to put into execution?
Yeah, it wasn't easy.
For sure.
I mean, we intentionally moved quite slow in the beginning, because I think being foreign, it was really important to us that we took our time to really listen and understand the reality on the ground before kind of like going out and trying to seek funding or support to scale something. But we have grown quite a bit recently. I mean, for the first 9 years, we were self-funded. So we had other jobs in the States, did consulting, farming, teaching, design work.
These are all things you've done for yourself, or?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. To help fund the organization. And I think that kept us at a very healthy pace, but also the reality is like the interest was not there. Like the conversation around waste has changed a lot over the last sort of maybe 3-4 years. But it took a lot of repetition, a lot of phone calls, and a lot of research to really understand how to reach people and how to garner the support that's necessary. And we have grown a lot recently. So we went from a team of 6 full-time people and 6 part-time people in 2021 to now we're a team of 55 full-time and 80 part-time.
Wow.
So yeah. It's been a big learning opportunity. I have gray hairs to show for it. I feel like I've aged like 10 years in 2 years, but it's really amazing. For me, the sort of turning point was just recognizing that we had done enough. Like we had done a lot of listening, we'd done a lot of stakeholder engagement, we'd done a lot of research, but we never wanted to do research just for research's sake. The whole point was to be able to act on it and deliver tangible change to the communities that we serve and to the communities who trusted us with their stories and with their information. And there was just a moment maybe in 2021, we were rather resource poor, but we were happy. I mean, we were doing work that we really believed in. But I just realized, that if we were really going to deliver tangible change for the communities that we cared about, like we really needed to buckle down and figure out a strategy that would sustain change. And so that's kind of, that led to a lot of our efforts around policy engagement and trying to really look at sustainable solutions for supporting Kantamanto and markets like it. So specifically looking at extended producer responsibility policies, which we began engaging policymakers on maybe in 2016. And then from there, really have evolved our approach and our stance, and recognized that we have a unique point of view, and I think can really apply pressure to ensure that these policies are effective and inclusive.
EPR, extended producer responsibility, is a really important idea across multiple different industries when it comes to the climate crisis, sustainability at large. it's been picking up steam in different avenues. For example, I know like plastic producers and packaging producers, there's a lot of talk around that as well. And I'm curious to know your take on the reaction from policymakers in the West, brands as well, to the idea of EPR in this industry, and how that's changed since 2016 when you started pushing for this.
Yeah, so I mean, in 2016, when we started engaging policymakers, the response that we got was that the global north needed to develop those solutions first, and then maybe would consider the global south in like 10 years. And that was not acceptable to us because the impact is being felt most immediately in communities like Kantamanto. And so that's where the priority should be from our perspective, and the voices that should be centered in figuring out how these policies should actually be structured. So it was really informative to kind of hear that response over and over again and recognize the lack of urgency in the global north. Because again, I don't think the problem, even though the problem is in our backyard in the global north, the problem originates in the global north. It's not felt there, right? And we have the privilege of forgetting about it. People might see a story on the news, or maybe even come to Ghana and attend a beach cleanup and feel moved and genuinely moved. Like I'm not discounting that. I mean, people are very genuine in their desire. Yeah. But the reality is like in the global north, we have so many things pulling on our attention that it's easy to forget, right? It's like it's easy to move on. Versus in Kantamanto, it's people's everyday life. So I think it was very useful for us to understand that the most important thing we could do is ensure that the voices of people working in Kantamanto, the people who are closest to the problem, who are also closest to the solution, would be uplifted in these policy conversations. And so a lot of our focus now is not just on kind of like inclusive conversations, but actually enabling delegation trips. So one of the things we've been doing over the last 2 years is taking delegations of our team members as well as Kantamanto community members to Europe, especially because Europe is a little bit more advanced on EPR than the US is currently. And that has been transformative because I think it's not expected, I don't think policymakers in the global north necessarily expect to have people from Kantamanto in their space, like taking up, space in their rooms. They expect to be able to go to them when they want to check off a box of like stakeholder perspectives and consultation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But instead, we're kind of like arriving in their space. And I think that that's been really transformative at expressing the urgency and really showing that this is something that matters to people. And it matters so much that we would travel to meet with you,
Absolutely.
And then second is that it's been transformative for our community and for our delegations, because on these trips, they're able to see the other side of the value chain. So we've been able to partner with sorters and charities who collect the clothes, but also for them to go into the fast fashion stores and see the clothing before anyone has even purchased it or worn it, has really helped our community to understand the root of the problem, which then allows us to all be more aligned on our advocacy. And this is all really helping us to, again, sort of present a more holistic perspective on extended producer responsibility. But I think what hasn't changed yet and what we're still struggling with is that policymakers, but also other NGOs or people who are familiar with extended producer responsibility, I think they still don't fully understand how different clothing is from, you were talking about like plastic packaging or mattresses or something like that, right? So we're always trying to emphasize that sorting better will not solve the problem, because clothing is not a plastic bottle, right? It's like if you have a plastic bottle and you're done with it and you put it in the bin, then the waste management system just has to look at the chemistry of the material. It says, is this PET or is it not? Is it clean? Is it not? Is it clear or is it colored? Does it have the cap? Does it not? Right? It's very cut and dry criteria that make something able to go into a recycling stream or headed for a landfill. But clothing is not that. Clothing is qualitative, like you might like jeans with holes in them, but I don't like jeans with holes in them. So so for you it's not waste, but for me it's waste, right? And for clothing there's a reuse market. For a plastic bottle there's not a reuse market. Maybe I reused it in my own house, but most people aren't going out and buying someone's secondhand plastic bottle to go refill, right? So it's a completely different commodity that needs to be considered completely differently. And I think we have still struggled to help policymakers and also allies within this space to understand just how differently EPR needs to be shaped to be effective for clothing, where the money can't just go to supporting recycling, for instance, because there's also reuse and repair and upcycling where the funding needs to go. And then also because there's this global reuse economy, the money needs to be able to travel with the clothes to support communities in these end markets where this work is actually being done.
I know you do a lot of work outside of just like policy engagement and EPR, pushing for EPR and whatnot. I know you guys do a lot of work when it comes to the social side of Kantamanto market and supporting individuals who have crises involved with the sellers and whatnot, as well as some of the more, let's say, tangible sustainability solutions like upcycling and recycling products. Can you speak more to some of the initiatives you guys are operating on the ground at the market that support both the people and reducing, let's say, waste in this space?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Essentially, we operate on 3 levels, essentially. So we have material R&D relief, and then our continued research and advocacy. So under material R&D, we have a recycling and decomposition space on the edge of Kantamanto, where we're actively buying waste back from retailers. So the things that they aren't able to sell, we purchase from them, we sort it, and we're making new materials and products out of that. So specifically, 2 products that we're looking at scaling are fiberboard. So this is where we've built technology locally as well, such as our shredder and our baler, our granulator, to basically take the clothing, shred it up, mix it with cassava glue, press it, and turn it into a board that can be used for furniture or sound insulation. It's really beautiful because you can just use the natural color of the clothing. You don't have to add any dye, and it's very, very colorful. We have some videos on our website, and it's really fun. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that, and looking at a few different product streams. So specifically looking at areas where it would be useful for fiberboard to replace products that are traditionally going to be made out of virgin plastic. So even something as simple as a hanger is one of the products that we're scaling currently to replace plastic hangers, but also like more high-end things like speakers, and also looking at custom furniture out of the fiberboard. And also just scaling it so that we can sell the 2x4s to other creatives and designers in industry to make their own products out of. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we're also making a mop, which might not seem that sexy to people, but it's a very beautiful mop. There's a lot of interest from people in the global north to like buy it as an art object, which is pretty funny to me. But it's
the irony of that, but
beautiful
is there, but
yeah, exactly. If it helps subsidize us, being able to sell the mop locally, then go for it. Hang it on your wall and admire it. But it's very necessary locally because we're in the tropics, and every household has like an average of 5 mops, and they're all imported, and they're all made out of very cheap material. So it's a really useful product for us to be able to replace with an upcycled or recycled version. And then we also have our decomposition experiments, essentially. So through our continued research, environmental research, we found that bacteria in the lagoon where a lot of the the clothing and other plastic waste
Yeah.
ends up has evolved to eat plastic. And so now we're partnering with this bacteria to try to help it do what it already does, but faster, to help us decompose some of the polyester waste. We have no results yet to sort of talk about on this podcast.
Sure.
But for us, the purpose of that is to really see if we can remediate these ecosystems. It's not to give industry, an excuse to continue overproducing polyester.
None of this
But the
is.
reality is exactly. The reality is that these ecosystems have been destroyed, and we need to figure out a way to revive them and support the natural processes that are already in place to do that. And then we also have our community business incubator, where we support upcyclers in finding new sales pathways, both locally and internationally. So we just did a pop-up, for instance, in Paris at Le Printemps with some of our designers and upcyclers. That was really fun. But also, again, sort of looking at creating space and infrastructure, even something as simple as studio space to operate. But also we're opening a storefront next month, actually, which we hope will be very supportive for the creatives that are already working in Kantamanto. And then we also have a couple fiber to fiber recycling pilots in the works. So there's no recycling technology in Ghana currently, but we're basically testing with partners outside of Ghana to see what the quality of the output will be if we take what we consider true waste from Kantamanto and try to recycle it into new fiber.
With that specifically, I'm curious, a lot of fiber to fiber recycling requires pure like a mono material to create any sort of valuable thing. Is that still a rule that would apply for your initiatives, or is it more broad?
No, we've had to sort and prep the material to be cotton rich, is the term that the industry uses, right? And to be white. And we've had to remove like all the stitching, as well as like any kind of prints. I mean, luckily, because we already have the fiberboard and the other sort of R&D efforts in place, we're able to just shred the material that the fiber to fiber recycling can't take and turn that into fiberboard. So there's not waste from the process for us. But it is, I think again, sort of in the global north, there's a lot of emphasis on fiber to fiber recycling, and we certainly do need it. But to your point, the reality is that the material that has been produced already is largely not monomaterial, and it's going to make it very difficult for these recycling technologies to be sustainable. And also, most of them have been developed using pre-consumer scrap, which is much easier to manage, and it's a clean stream. So we'll see. That's why we're running these pilots, to see if it's if the quality of the material will be worth it to pursue potentially bringing technology to Ghana. But I also think, again, it's like we have to look systemically at consumer behavior and where we are at. Like the reality is that the average person will spend more money on fiberboard than they would spend on a recycled cotton t-shirt. Because this is how effective fast fashion has been at convincing people that clothing should be cheap, right?
Cheap and accessible.
So I think everyone who's trying to come up with these solutions, these circular solutions, especially when it comes to recycling, is really stuck, because the economics of it are really difficult and do not work. And so until we change consumer behavior and people become more educated on the realities of the supply chain, I don't think people are going to be willing to pay the true cost of a recycled product.
I completely agree with that statement. Liz, for the purpose of this podcast, I really want to highlight your position within the chain, because again, I think one thing that every person on this podcast and everyone within the sustainability space understands is that the approach needs to be systemic and needs to be a collective aggregate change. So, what we see right now is an increased amount of export from the global north to the global south, and importing of the global south, and multiple layers within that trade. Once it hits Ghana, for example, you get the people who import the larger bales, and then it can sell those differently, separate them to individual retailers. As retailers buy the bales sight unseen, effectively, they can't really see what they're buying.
Exactly.
And it's a roll of the dice, and then they have to sell it in the market. Most of it going to most of the product's not really sellable anyway, and it goes into landfill and pollutes the local environment, among other issues. What can the importers do? What can the exporters do in the global north? And what can those individuals, let's say those stakeholders closer to the actual market, do to reduce the waste that occurs within Kantamanto market and in markets like that around the world?
So I think first is that they have to acknowledge the waste as being real. And second, I think, is that we need to all be working in unison and in solidarity to tackle the root cause, right? Because the clothing that arrives in Ghana has been sorted in the global north. It's been deemed rewearable in the global north, and a lot of efforts and labor and skill goes into that process. But the reality is that sorting cannot manufacture better quality clothes, right? It's like if the clothing that's coming into the global secondhand supply chain is already low quality, it doesn't, like, someone who's highly skilled at sorting that clothing can't perform magic and turn that clothing into a high quality product, right? So we really need to be focusing, coming together to focus on the roots of the issue. And I think having a more unified voice and a more unified campaign to tackle overproduction and to work on policy, systemic policy interventions, such as extended producer responsibility, which I think is very important, because we have to be realistic about the fact that maybe some of these other policy interventions that are looking at improving how clothing is designed from the get-go, right? Those policies are very necessary, but they're not in place yet, which again means that we have 20 years worth of material that we have to figure out how to manage. And extended producer responsibility can help us to provide solutions for that legacy material, while also being forward-looking and working in tandem with these other policies to ensure that there's more mono-material garments and better quality garments being produced. So yeah, for me, that's the key, is just solidarity. Because I think that the conversation around waste has become really emotional when I don't think it really needs to be. I think that within the secondhand supply chain, when we're talking about clothing going unsold, we're talking about a business, right? It's not a moral judgment on the person who donated the clothing, or the person who sorted the clothing, or the person who exported the clothing, right? It's just it's just a fact that this is a business. It's not a charity. It's a supply chain like anything else. And the retailers who are working in Kantamanto have business expenses. And the reality is just that the quality of the clothing, again, is not enough to support their business expenses, which is why it ends up as waste. And I think the more we can come together around the fact that this is a business conversation, and it's not about sort of like pointing fingers at one another or accusing one another of sort of unethical behavior, the more we'll be able to move forward in unison around the realities of this trade and what's happening. Because for us, again, when I went to Ghana in 2011, like, there was no clothing waste on the beach. Like, maybe you would see a plastic bottle here and there.
Really?
But there was no clothing waste. And I still remember, like, the first time that we saw clothing in the ocean. I think it was like 2017. We were at a restaurant on the water that is really close to the market. And there was a pair of jeans that was just like surfing the waves, kind of like spread eagle going over the waves. And I was like, is that is that clothing? Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And then you fast forward to today, and there's
Yeah.
piles of clothing taller than I am on the beach. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's really not a good situation. Like,
Mhm.
to put it in perspective for people, I didn't talk about all the different things that we're doing, but one of the things, we have an 80-person cleanup team. So our
Mhm.
team is actively right now removing over 10 tons of clothing and other plastic waste from the beach on a weekly basis. And we could be removing more. It's just that we don't have enough trucks
It's
and
crazy.
like infrastructure in place to do
That's
that.
crazy.
Yeah. So we've been focused on like one section of the beach for the last 6 months. It's a section of the beach where there's a fishing community, and that's why we want to focus there, because it's not only is there a lot of textile waste, but also it's impacting people's livelihoods.
Mhm.
And so we've been cleaning this beach, again, removing over 10 tons every single week from this one section of the beach for over 6 months. And just a month ago, we started to be able to see the sand. Um, and we were very excited by
Damn.
that. And
Well,
then
that's crazy.
yeah. And then 2 weeks ago, we went back, because our full team joins the cleanup once a month, and then the separate cleanup team does it every single week. So we
Mhm.
had a full team cleanup 2 weeks ago, and it was we had just had a big rain, and the rain had pushed out all this clothing through the sewer system, and
Yeah.
it was really bad again. Like, there were piles again taller than I am. We couldn't see the sand anymore. I was walking out into the waves and just like sticking my hands in the water and pulling out fists of clothes. It was like very apocalyptic, and
Yeah.
I think it's really daunting, because we're working super hard. We talk about cleaning up as a sport. People are showing up. We're doing like the hard work of physically engaging with this waste and physically removing it,
Mhm.
and still we can barely put a dent
Yeah.
in. And I think
Absolutely.
that just speaks to, again, like, we're really no match for this continued oversupply of clothes. And so until we can come together in unison to really tackle this overproduction problem,
Mhm.
um, I don't have much hope in systemic solutions. I have hope
Mhm.
in our community, um, but I don't have much hope in the solutions that are being developed having any real positive impact if all of those solutions continue to be buried under this constant onslaught of new product. So,
Completely.
yeah.
Oh, that's a truth and a feeling that a lot of people share in this space. And nevertheless, you're doing really good work, and you are engaging your community, and
Thanks.
your community members are supporting their community and the like. I think the OR Foundation has always been sort of a pioneer, at least from my perspective, right? I mean, someone who's been
Thanks.
involved in sustainable fashion and, reading with the webs, different blogs and whatnot, and just sort of like poking my head around is your organization really shines a light on a problem a huge part of the problem that doesn't get enough attention. And so I really want to commend you for that. One
Thanks.
last question before I let you go, Liz, again, there's just so much more to this problem and this area, this component of the value chain than what a 45-minute conversation can entail. But what does success look like for you as an organization in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some of your goals for the OR Foundation? And yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, real success would look like not being necessary, right?
Mhm.
But I think in terms of long-term goals, realistically, within the next 5 to 10 years, our long-term goals are to make Corley Lagoon swimmable. So Corley Lagoon is one of the ecosystems that's been destroyed
Hmm.
by clothing and other waste. So that comes down to the sort of bioremediation work that we're undertaking and the cleanup work that we're undertaking.
Mhm.
Two is to make Kantamanto a hub of circularity locally and a place that people can be proud of.
Mhm.
I think it's one of the sort of elements of waste colonialism that I don't think gets talked about enough is the fact that everyone in Ghana right now is walking around wearing clothes, right? But no one in Ghana can take their own clothes to Kantamanto to be resold or repaired or upcycled, because this entire market, this space in the center of the city, this skill sets, everyone's time, all of this money is being applied to solve a foreign problem exclusively. There's no longer this balance where Kantamanto no longer really is a place to sell locally made things. It's completely imbalanced, and there's this relationship of dependence that needs to be broken, where we need a better balance of, the secondhand clothing trade should continue. We don't call for a ban on imports of secondhand clothing in any way, but we'd like to see it balanced where Kantamanto can also serve local community and become a local reuse and upcycling hub as well. Because otherwise we're just going to have a problem on the other end, which is that we're going to have clothing in people's closets in Ghana with nowhere good for it to go, right? It's like there needs to be this holistic solution. And then another big goal of ours that we didn't really talk about, but is to eliminate the need for dangerous head carrying. So we didn't speak about this, but the bales that arrive in Kantamanto are head carried throughout the markets by young girls and women, called kayeye, which is a term that means she who carries the burden. And these bales weigh 55 kilograms, 120 pounds. They're very heavy, not something that goes far beyond kind of like traditional head carrying or any kind of head carrying that's safe, right? And these women are carrying these bales for up to 1 kilometer per trip, sometimes 10 trips a day. And it's backbreaking and can be fatal work. So we know women who have died because their necks have broken under the weight of these bales. And the reality is that this labor is necessary to make the market work. Like the way the market is structured, there's no other way for the clothing to get to be transported to get to where it needs to go. And so most of our financial resources right now are earmarked for a demonstration site where we're working with local architects to upfit a section of the market to eliminate the need to head carry. And then hopefully we will be able to get the rest of the funding that we need to do the entire market. Because for me, none of the kind of like material-based solutions, the fiberboard, the potential for fiber-to-fiber recycling, none of it really matters if these women still have to head carry that material and are still in this position, right? So until we've eliminated that, the rest of it really can't be seen as a success. And then definitely on the policy front, our goal is to make extended producer responsibility globally accountable, meaning that money should flow to communities like Kantamanto as a sustained investment in these communities to improve the waste management infrastructure, but also to invest in the reuse and upcycling talent that already exists. And specifically within that, we don't just want to see money flow to the global south, but we also want to see production volumes made transparent. We have a campaign right now, which you're a part of, called Speak Volumes, where we're asking brands to publish their production volumes. And then we would like to see a reduction target from some of the biggest producers, because again, to everything we've talked about, I don't really see many of these other solutions. I don't see how we can catch up. There's so many amazing people working on solutions. The solutions do exist, but we can't catch our breath.
Absolutely.
Like there needs to be space given for those solutions to actually scale and make a real impact. And I don't believe that that's going to happen until we, again, focus on overproduction and try to set reduction targets.
I don't even know if it's fair to say it's like the elephant in the room, but like that is the big piece of the pie that needs to be addressed, and everything else kind of falls short after that if we don't close off the water falling into the bucket. Taking a little spoonful out every day is not going to do much. But